Lara Yeretsian, criminal defense attorney. And want to start with you, Lara, and I want to talk about something that Eric Nelson, that's the defense attorney who was questioning that juror, just brought up. He brought up the fact that there was more than one autopsy in this case, one done by the medical examiner in this case, and the other done by someone hired by the family to perform that exam. Now, this also feeds into the issue of the drug use and the cause of death. Since the cause of death is going to be such a seminal part of the case for the defense, are you surprised that it's not something that Eric Nelson is focusing more upon during the questioning of these jurors?
I don't want to say I'm surprised. It all depends on how much information is in the questionnaires. Maybe he's gotten enough in the questionnaires. I know we talked about this earlier, and maybe he's gonna slowly get into it. Uh, you know, part of Wadir is that you want to get your message out there, what your position in the case is going to be, what some of your arguments are going to be. You're kind of trying you. It's an opportunity to kind of educate that jury, and I can see that your question is kind of touching on that. This is an opportunity for him to also educate them, to also at the same time find out what they feel, how they feel about drugs. And yes, I would have expected a little more, but let's give him time. Maybe he's going to do it later, or maybe he's gotten his answers in the questionnaire, and because this is such a private matter, doesn't want to do it out in the open. I maybe it's something that it's been discussed with the judge. Like I said, it's not very clear to me. But again, yes, I would have expected a little more than what he's done.
It's interesting, Lara. As Eric pointed out, the concern is that the public and potentially the jurors will think that this is some admission of fault. Now, we lawyers know that a settlement is not an admission of fault and not meant to be an admission of fault. But the layperson doesn't always see it that way. And in addition, we lawyers also know that the potential jurors are not supposed to know or hear about this. They're not supposed to be paying attention to the media. But there's a real risk, isn't there, when a breaking news thing happens during jury selection, that they're going to catch wind of this and it might impact them.
Especially in this time and era. I mean, with the technology and the social media, everybody is going to hear about this. $27 million is not, and the timing of the announcement. You know that even though these jurors are not supposed to know about this, most likely they're going to get a wind of it. And yes, I mean, even though technically we all know as lawyers that this is not an admission by the city. The city is basically deciding not to take a risk, and they're willing to settle this and put this aside and let the criminal case, move forward. My timing is awful, and no matter what we say, the impact that it's going to have on these jurors, if they hear this, and I have to assume the worst, that some of them may hear this and find out about it. It's not going to be that pleasant. It's the impact it's going to have on their psyche, right, and the way they're going to think. To know that a city is already given $27 million is not the best. Right. But at the same time, we talked about this. This could calm down all the tension, and maybe it's going to be a little more positive in that sense. Less pressure, less tension, right, on the jury. So you can look at it both ways.
Lara, I want to bring you in. Knowing what you know about this juror, the fact that he's getting married to a lawyer, the answers to the questions he just gave, what do you think of him as a juror? Do you think that he leans toward either side? And how would you feel about him as a defense attorney?
Well, I mean, the fact that he's so eager to the point where he's willing to push back his wedding date is a little bit of a red flag for me. That's someone who's too excited and too eager to be on a jury. But at the same time, I like some of the stuff. If you're on the defense team, you're going to like some of the stuff that he's saying, right? He thought he wrote down on the questionnaire as one of his answers that he thought that George Floyd was under the influence and his behavior was a little unruly. So, you put that, and if you're trying to balance the two, you'd say, you know what, I'm taking this juror. So there's good points for both sides. And as from the defense perspective, I would take him.
Lara, would it concern you and maybe even make you consider striking this juror when he said that he had formed a very negative opinion of your client?
Of course, it would concern me, but I would want to hear more. I mean, at least I know the person is being honest. He's not trying to hide the fact that he's formed an opinion. And it's okay to form an opinion before coming to a trial, as long as during the trial you can put that opinion aside and reevaluate the facts based on the evidence. So it all depends on what else he says. Yeah, does it raise a red flag? Of course, I'm worried. I'm not crazy about the idea of having somebody who's got negative feelings towards my client. But I mean, this was a case that was covered by the media nationally, globally. Everybody was watching this. And, Chauvin was not the most popular figure on earth. Most people did not like him, correct? Someone died. But, that's
Right.
that in this case, that shouldn't be the deciding factor. There's got to be more to you want to hear more as far as what the juror is going to be saying.
Laura, I want to bring you in to talk about the ethics of that and how it might make jurors feel. I actually have been on panels where we've talked about the fact that jurors aren't allowed or supposed to look at our social media. And so it might actually make a juror a little bit turned off, a little bit angry, a little bit defensive about being investigated. How do you think that serves the attorney who has to say, hey, I was checking out your Facebook?
Well, the bottom line is that that attorney is not the one who's going to be judging somebody, who's going to decide whether someone's guilty or not guilty, but the juror will. And it's part of that attorney's job. I mean, it would be malpractice, honestly, not to look at the social media, especially in a case like this. You have to know what's behind that image that the juror is presenting. You have to know what's behind that. We can't read the juror's mind. So the least can do and must do in a case like this, and most jurors have got to understand that it's
Yeah,
pertinent to look at the social media. People are living their lives nowadays on social media. You see everything they eat, everything that's happening
right,
within their lives, moment by moment.
right.
Sometimes details. How do you
Yeah.
turn your back on that kind of wealth of information?
Lara, I want to ask you, this particular juror has mentioned more than once that she feels like there's a biased media. If you are one of the attorneys on either side, would that have any concern for you, the fact that she thinks that the media is biased, or do you think that it doesn't really matter within the confines of what's going to be presented in court?
Well, I mean, when you look at it, I think it shows you that this is someone that's more thought into, doesn't just buy what the media gives her. So this is the kind of juror, as a defense attorney, I'm going to want on the jury, because I don't want someone who blindly believes what's put out there, right? That she questions things. She's willing to not decide the case on what the media has given her, but wait until she's in a courtroom where she can decide the facts. So to me, that's someone who's very conscious, and the kind of person who's going to be able to keep an open mind, and the kind of juror that I would want on the jury. So it's a plus
Yeah, I
from the defense
I
perspective.
I, I agree. I think that for the defense, that's a repeated statement that can really be helpful. Laura, what did you think? Did you see anything that sort of stood up for you? And would that issue, as Eric just laid it out so well, would that issue of her feeling emotional about this video that is much longer than it seems she saw, would that be a major red flag to you?
Not that major. I mean, I feel like maybe she felt like she was put on the spot and had to come up with a reason. Why didn't you watch? I mean, there could have been all sorts of reasons why she didn't watch the complete video. Not everyone has watched it, and being emotional is acceptable. I mean, someone is dying on that video, so it could be emotional for anyone, whether you're pro Chauvin, against Chauvin, whether you've made up your mind, haven't made up. It could still be emotional. But what bothered me a little bit more was what she said after that. That she feels negatively, or her feelings towards Chauvin are slightly negative, or somewhat negative, because, and she explains it, that she feels that this can't be procedure. She's kind of semi made up her mind. But the one good thing that she said, even though it did raise a red flag, the one good thing that she said, that if the facts come in about procedure and it's different, she's willing to hear what the procedures are and make the decision based on that. She's a very
Yeah.
methodical. She knows exactly how to think through these things. She's a juror who's got experience in resolving conflict.
I want to bring in my fabulous guest, Laura, and start with you. Do you feel like it's hard for both sides because they're questioning each juror, not really knowing what the next juror and the juror after that is going to say? Or do you think that since they do have the benefit of these very lengthy, very in depth questionnaires, that some of that problem is taken care of?
Some of that problem is taken care of, because obviously they had a preview of the jury pool, correct? They've got this lengthy questionnaire where all these jurors have been asked gazillion questions, and many of the questions do address some of these issues that are related to possible bias. So they've got an idea of who probably their top choices are, but it's still a gamble because you never know. During voir dire, when you're questioning the jurors, there's a different feel to it. You get to hear the person. It's not this dry information that's on a piece of paper. You get to ask them the additional questions that you wanted to ask, to see the ones that are especially right in the middle that you can't really tell. I mean, they're maybe pro BLM, but they also think BLM maybe took it too far and there was some abuse. And like this gentleman was saying, it was hijacked. So you want to know a little bit more. So of course, there's always a gamble. You never know. You never know. It's really tough to read jurors, even with the questionnaires, even with the voir dire and additional
Right.
questions. It's almost impossible to
Right.
really know what's going on in the mind of a juror because they could hide it well. Some people can hide that stuff.
Right. How does the defense overcome that? Overcome the fact that every juror sees the world through a perspective more similar to George Floyd's?
Just because every juror sees it through the perspective of George Floyd doesn't mean that they can't also relate to an officer. I mean, their job is here to decide the case on the facts and not necessarily on how they feel or emotions or visceral reactions and just their own personal experiences. It has to be based on the evidence that comes in during this trial. And one of the things that the defense has to do is make sure that they're impartial jurors, that they're going to be able to put aside
Yeah.
their emotions and their feelings and truly decide this case on the evidence that they hear and see during the trial in the courtroom, or if allowed outside the courtroom if they happen to go to the scene.